Imagine that you've just been hired to manage a project management office. The executives from this organization have been working on a list of projects that they want to complete next year, and they've asked you to help. So there's already 30 projects on this list. And you say, may I go away and take a bit of a review of these projects and come back with my recommendations? So you go away and you look, and when you first start scanning through these 30 projects, you see a couple that are bigger than anything this organization has ever undertaken. You looked at the resources that were available to complete these projects. You looked at the annual budget. You go back and meet with the executive team, and your recommendation is, guys, cut the projects in half. 30 to 15. Not a real popular recommendation, huh? But they go away and they work on this, and when they come back, indeed, they have cut the list from 30 to 27. Some of you have been there, have you not? Each of us face trade-off decisions each day. In the accounting world, we call these opportunity costs. Just last Saturday, I had to make the personal decision, do I stay home and work in the yard, which I really needed to do, or do I go with my wife out of town to see my precious 16-month-old granddaughter? Guess who won? Little Catherine always wins. Now, in the work world, it looks like this. Do I finish this email, or do I head on to my team meeting so that I get there on time? Right? Or do I finish the report that's due to my project sponsor by 12 today? Or do I work on this mammoth presentation that I'm going to be giving in a couple of days? We all are faced with those kinds of decisions. So, take a look at this slide here just a moment. And I want you to think about your projects just a moment. I spend too much time on X and not enough time on Y. If you have something to write with, would you jot down what is your X and what is your Y? I spend too much time on X and not enough time on Y. Would you jot down your X and your Y? And would you take just a moment, if you're comfortable with sharing that, would you turn to somebody at your table and share right quick your X and your Y? Okay. Is somebody bold enough to share with the entire group what your X and Y? Right back there. Do we have a microphone?
I spend too much time worrying and not enough time living.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Somebody else, one more. Your X and Y. Okay, no more bold ones.
Oh, I saw a hand up there in the front.
Oh, way up here. I'm sorry, missed you. Again, what we're looking at is these trade-off decisions. We can't do everything, so we have to be intentional in our decisions. What is your X and Y?
In the day-to-day operations versus the improvements to help us to get out of the day-to-day.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So regardless of whether you're managing a project management office, a program, or you have a handful of projects, what I see with a lot of project managers is our workload far exceeds the capacity that we have for work. And because of that, there's a good bit of stress that's there. It's not good for our productivity. It's not good for our own health. So what is the answer? Not so quick. John Pinkerville of Stanford University, they did some research about the number of hours we work and our productivity levels. Get this, quote, research that attempts to quantify the relationship between hours worked and productivity found that employee output falls sharply after a 50-hour work week and falls off the cliff after 55 hours. So much so that someone who puts in 70 hours, and haven't we all done that along the way, puts in 70 hours, produces nothing more for those extra 15 hours of work. So if this is not the solution, what is? Well, what I'm about to present to you has the potential and the strong potential of actually reducing your workload, of reducing the amount of time it takes you to complete your projects, and has the potential of reducing some of the anxiety that we feel about whether we're doing the right things at the right time. And here it is. Do more of the work that matters most. Would you say that with me on the count of three? 1, 2, 3. Do more of the work that matters most. Now, the deeper question is, how in the world do we know what matters most? I mean, do we dial a friend? Do we poll the audience? Do we ask our project sponsor? Good luck there. I heard something in the back there. Ask your boss? Okay. That would do it too, huh? Greg McKeown. Any of you read the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown? Great. I see Kathy back there. Fantastic book. He said essentialism is not about how to get more things done. It's about how to get the right things done. The essentialist deliberately distinguishes the vital few from the trivial many, eliminates the non-essentials, and then removes obstacles so that the essential things have clear, smooth passage. I really think this is a great way to think about risk management. With all risk management, we should be focused on our objectives. And when we're working towards completing those objectives, there are obstacles in the road. What are the vital few things that really matter most about removing the obstacles so that there is clear, smooth passage? I'm fearful that if we don't do this well, that we might be like the people that C.S. Lewis described. They run around with fire extinguishers in times of flood. Do you know any project managers like this? They're well-intentioned. They're working really hard, but they're applying the wrong tools at the wrong time. So, what I want to give you today is what I call the CAP method. The CAP method. And this is really a combination of three very simple risk management tools. All of you, every one of you can perform these processes. Three simple risk management processes. CAP stands for the following. C is categorize. A is assess. And P is prioritize. Now, let me just go ahead and tell you at the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you a URL where you can download a summary of all that I'm covering with you. I encourage you to take notes, but I have a complete summary there for your review. Let me say at this point that each one of these, in and of themselves, has great power in helping you determine what really matters most. But the real synergy is when we do all three of these together. And I think you'll see that more clearly as we go through the presentation. So before I go further, you may be wondering, well, Harry, does this work in an agile project? And the answer is absolutely. It doesn't matter the kind of life cycle you're using, whether it's waterfall or agile or some type of iterative approach or staged delivery, this will work. So, I don't know when you started learning about risk, but for me it was around age 5. Here's a picture of me and my twin brother Charles. Which one's Charles? Well, it's the one on the left. How do I know that? He has the cowlick. Okay? C for cowlick, C for Charles. That's how people told us apart in the little town of Donaldsonville, Georgia, in southwest Georgia, where we really did grow pecans. Okay? So, what is risk? Well, let me tell you this story. One day, we went next door to my grandmother's house. Nobody's home. We find some matches. Now, these are not just any old sort of matches. They are kitchen matches, big matches. And these matches, you know, we would light and we would ooh and ah and just be amazed. And when they would go out, what would we do with this match? Naturally, we would throw it in the garbage can. Now, remember, think about it. Back during this day, we didn't have plastic garbage bags. We had paper bags from the Piggly Wiggly. Okay? So, think about the facts that I'm telling you, and when we're looking at risk, we need to know the facts, and then we're going to determine what the risks are. In this particular situation, knowing what I've told you, what is the risk? The house might catch on fire. So, I want to give you a very simple way to think about risk. Risks are things that may happen. Things that may happen. Now, it may be good things. It may be bad things. But risks are things that may happen. So, in this particular situation, there was a potential risk of fire, and in fact, it actually happened. My mother told the story many times about us walking back into the house kind of nonchalantly and declaring, "Mama, Nanny's house is on fire." Well, something else was on fire a little later after the fire department left. Something might happen, and it did. And I began to understand what risk was really all about. Now, the PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge, gives us a more formal definition. How many PMPs do we have in here? Okay, so all of you could regurgitate this, right? An uncertain event or condition that what? If it occurs. You see the phrase? We're saying something might happen. You see it? That if it occurs, that it can cause a what? A positive or a negative effect on the project objectives. Things like schedule, scope, quality, budget. Okay? So, let's keep that definition in mind. I wonder if you think about your projects, are there any similarities between this picture of this closet and some of your projects? I want you to think about today's presentation like this is a professional organizer that's come to help you organize your closet. You know, closets don't stay orderly by themselves, do they? It's amazing. Over time, it just goes to hell in a handbasket. And, you know, at some point we got a bunch of clothes in here that we never even wear, right? We get so frustrated at some point we say, okay, I'm going to spend a half a day, I'll straighten up the closet, but does it stay that way? The reason that there's disorder and things fall back into disorder in our projects is because there's a lack of process. There's a lack of just some very basic fundamental processes. So let's look at the CAP method, beginning with categorizing risk. So here we want to look at why do we categorize. We'll look at some examples of risk categories, and we'll do a quick little exercise at your tables. So why do we organize? Well, first of all, we do it all because we want to do more of the work that what? Thank you. More of the work that matters most. We're not trying to respond to every single risk there is. We're trying to respond to the things that matter most. So when I go to Publix and I want to find some bananas, what section of the grocery store do I go to? Produce. And then within the produce section, I go to a subsection that has bananas. Is there any other fruit in that section? There's no blueberries, there's no oranges, just bananas. So I want you to begin to understand the reason that we categorize, and whether you shop on Amazon or you're at a bookstore or you're at the grocery store, we run into categories all the time, do we not? And the reason that they're there is to bring order into our lives, to make it easier for us to find things, to make sense of things. And so if you want to get your projects in order, one of the things that we need to do, and it's really not that complicated, is to begin to understand what are the categories of risk. Any of you ever heard of Marie Kondo? Okay? If you haven't, check it out. Go to YouTube, go to Netflix, and watch. This woman is amazing. She's Japanese, and she has taken the world by storm decluttering people's houses. And she uses these 5 categories, beginning with clothing and going right through the sentimental items. More on that in a bit. So in our project world, we have risk categories. Now let me just say this up front. You should ask your organization, your PMO, or wherever the project management group is, do we have a standard set of risk categories that we should be using in our projects? And if they say yes, then we want to use those categories. If not, you could start with a very simple list with these categories. And we were talking about the triple threat constraint earlier. You know, all this stuff ties together. So you could have risk categories of scope, schedule, budget, and quality. Now, for larger projects, you may need what's called a risk breakdown structure in RBS. In the download that I'm going to give you, there's an excellent article in there from Dr. David Hilson on the risk breakdown structure. So if you want to go deeper with this, I'm going to be providing you with some material there. Now, Here's the question. Let's say that you're asked to undertake a project and it is unlike anything that anybody in your organization has ever done before. There's no standard set of risk categories. I want to give you a quick way to define your risk categories. Here we go. This is what's called the affinity diagram or affinity map exercise. So the first step is we define an issue or question. For example, we might state the objectives of our project, and then we might say what may help or hinder our ability to achieve this project. So we start collecting these ideas. And when I do this, and I love to do this exercise, it is fun, it is creative, it amazes me how people think and really get to the root of good categories. So a lot of times people write them on these sticky notes, and then step 4, we begin to sort these. This makes sense? So we start sorting them based on common attributes. And then we look at each of those clusters and we say, what might we label that cluster of risk? Okay? And then we discuss the results. So let's do a quick little exercise here. I want you to pretend that you've been given a project. And here's your project. You've been invited to speak at the 2020 PMI Palmetto Chapter Symposium. That's your project. I want you to talk just a moment at your table about what are some potential risks that might occur in this project. What might happen, good or bad. Okay? Take just a moment at your tables and talk through that. Let's take the roving mics just for a moment. Would we have a table or two? I'd love to have a table that maybe hasn't spoken yet. Okay? Give you an opportunity. Share with us a couple of things that you identified as risks, things that might happen in this project. Come on, be bold. All right.
All right, so we looked at this from 2 ways. If I'm already a speaker, I might already have that date scheduled or have a traveling conflict. If I'm not a speaker, I might suck at speaking.
Okay, how about one more table? I think that this table here, will you volunteer? Great. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda.
We came up with some positive and negative. So,
Okay.
if we're a speaker, we could get sick.
Okay.
Flight could be down. Busy, family, assistance, maybe another obligation, a project or something. Maybe the Save East stuff doesn't work. I don't know. But otherwise, we could have an exciting topic we want to share with the folks. Also, if we're a preparer, we get PDUs for that, right? Not just sitting out here.
Love it.
And then, and also, we've talked to a lot of smart people like Cheryl and some others here. Maybe do some collaboration, come up with different solutions, things of that nature.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Now, I want to show you 2 slides right quick, and let's just pretend that you came up with these items, and we've already put these 3 items in a cluster, okay? We've already put these 3 items in a cluster, and here's another 3 that's in another cluster. So let's go back to the first cluster. Is there a label, or what would we call, this, what? Equipment. Okay, hardware. Okay? Technical. So, you see how this affinity diagram thing begins to work? Here's the key point I want you to keep in mind when you're trying to pick your categories. What you're really trying to do is say these are areas in the project where there may be great uncertainty. Okay? It's fine to use scope, schedule, budget, quality, if that's the areas you really think there's great uncertainty. So here we say equipment or we say technical. We've got a category for those kinds of risks. What about this one? Delivery, I hear, organization, engagement. Okay? So you notice that one on the right seems maybe not quite as aligned with the other two, and this is the kind of natural struggle you may have a little bit until you can take and move these around until you get where you need to be to firm up the categories. So the affinity map or diagram. So we've talked about categorization. Let's move on to assessing risk. Why do we assess? We do this to do what? To do more of the what? Of the work that matters most. Do more of the work that matters most. Let me tell you another little story. I was engaged by a company as a program manager to implement a multi-million-dollar software solution. And we took an agile approach. We'd gone through a few sprints, so we had some working software, right? And we wanted to bring some users in, and these users were from multiple states. We wanted to bring them in. I'd worked with the product owner, and we said, we want to show them the working software and get their feedback in terms of requirements. Any of you ever done this sort of thing? Okay? I'm sure you have. And so we brought them in. We spent the day. It went amazingly well. Lots of good engagement. I'm up at the white marker board capturing all these requirements. And I had talked with the product owner, and we had said at the end of the day, we want to do a prioritization of all these requirements so that we really know what matters most, right? And so we did that. Well, lo and behold, just so happens the president of the company comes into this meeting, and he's watching all of this. He comes up to me after the meeting. He says, I think your prioritization thing was an absolute waste of time. I said, really? Help me understand. Why do you think that was a waste of time? He said, well, these are the users. And if they say they want something, we need to be able to give all of it to them. Some of you have been there. Never mind that he had just cut the budget by 30% and wants this mammoth thing completed 4 months earlier than we originally estimated. Right? All senior management, they understand everything, right? Yeah. I love the way John Maxwell puts it. You cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything. We want sometimes to make everything of equal importance, and it's really not. It's really not. So why do we assess risk? Somebody talk to me just a minute. Why do we do qualitative and quantitative risk analysis?
We have to know what to focus on.
Okay, we have to know what to focus on. Any other comments?
Mitigation strategy.
Okay, we have to know when to do these mitigation strategies. What else?
Understand what it's going to do.
Okay, what it's going to do. Okay, anything else? We want to be successful. Okay? So we assess risk so that we can distinguish one risk from another risk from another risk. They're not all equal in importance or impact. So, Back to Marie Kondo. Anybody in here knows how she coaches her clients to determine which clothes to keep and which clothes to get rid of? I need a mic on this one. I see this individual knows exactly. I want you to listen. This is, okay. Here we go. How do we do that? What does she tell her clients?
So she has a show on Netflix. I've watched it once, but they have to hold each individual item of clothing, and they have to, when they hold that item, see if it sparks joy. And if it doesn't spark joy, they tell the item thank you, and they put it in the donation bin.
Really? She has them take all the clothes out of the drawers, out of the closets, put them on a bed, and it's embarrassing sometimes the amount of clothes that we as Americans have. I mean, it really is. And then you pick up this garment and you hold it, and you're thinking, oh yeah, that sparks some joy. I'm going to keep this baby. Okay? And we go to the next item, and that one doesn't, so it goes in the giveaway pile. Now, I'm not promising you, if you hold your wrist close to you, that it's going to spark any joy. But you must have some way to distinguish what's most important. So let's look real quick at the difference of qualitative and quantitative risk analysis. On the qualitative side, we should be doing this in all of our projects. The good news is it's quick. The bad news is it is subjective. So we have to be careful because it's very easy for bias to come into that evaluation. On the quantitative side, it is optional. So we really have to determine whether it's worth doing. It is objective. It is numeric. That is that we are actually quantifying the amount of risk that we have. This takes more time. But what we get out of this is more information. You say, well, Harry, what do I need that information for? Two things for sure. One, to develop your contingency reserve. You may recall the contingency reserve is there for handling known risk. The management reserves for our unknown risk. So you've already identified the risks. I see them in the risk register. If the risk actually occurs, do you have enough money to be able to handle that risk? That's what quantitative risk analysis provides for us. The other thing is we've got some really big projects, millions and millions of dollars. We get to certain points in the project, we better be ready to have enough information for management to determine, do we continue down this path, the go, no-go decisions. So let's talk a little bit more about the qualitative risk analysis. The simplest way to do this is, and I see this often, people just go through the risk register and they'll say low, medium, and high. That one's low, that one's low, that one's high, that one's medium. That's fine. I would encourage, if you're going to use that, what I call KISS method, keep it super simple, I would have a little more range. Very high, high, medium, low, and very low. I would want a little more range than just a low, medium, and high. The more popular qualitative method is the probability impact matrix. And this is what I use on almost every project I manage. Fairly simple. Here's the way it works. So we identify the risk. We have risk A. And by the way, who rates these risks? Thank you. This is not for the project manager to go off in a closet and do by themselves. We bring the subject matter experts, our team members, into the room, and we say, hey, risk A, you know, here are the facts. We've been playing with matches, blah, blah, blah. Here's the risk. what is the probability that this risk might occur on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being highest, and they go 4. Great. So impact is if the risk actually occurs, how big of a deal is this? Again, a scale of 1 to 5, they say 5. Well, this is a pretty significant risk. How do we get the risk score? Real difficult math. Multiply probability times impact. And we get a risk score of 20. Now I'm beginning to distinguish this risk from this risk from this risk. You see where we're going? Okay? So in the quantitative world, we use techniques like a 3-point estimate. We might do a decision tree analysis. We might do Monte Carlo analysis if you've got the computing power and the time to do that. The one that I like to use the most is the expected monetary value, or EMV. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use the others. Please don't hear me say that. But I like this, and here's why I like it. When I bring up quantitative analysis to most project managers, they're like, oh, stop right there. That's too hard. That's too complicated. It really doesn't have to be. Look at this example. With the EMV method, so we have risk A, again, we have the subject matter people in the room, and we say, what's the probability up to 100%? They say 80. Great. If it actually occurred, what would it cost us? $10,000. And then we multiply again, probability times impact. See how this is like the probability impact matrix? So it's, to me, when I work with teams and they've been doing the qualitative, for me to take them over to do EMV is not a big jump. So I can add up the risk exposure, the quantified amount of risk. I can add all of that up, and now I know the amount of risk exposure that I have for that project. Here's a tip. This is how we go about developing our contingency reserve. There's a little bit more to it than that, but it is very close to what I just described. It's not that complicated. So, remember earlier I said the real synergy, the power comes when we do CAP, all of these things together. So, now, what we're going to do, let's assume that we have our risk register, we have our risk, we're using these 4 risk categories. I can add up the risk exposure within each of those categories, create a simple pie chart, and I have what I like to call in the risk management world a risk profile. A risk profile. And I can see that the biggest risk concentration falls into the area of budget, and then schedule, then scope, quality, and then other. Now, why is this helpful? Talk to me. Why do I want to know this?
This is easy to share with your stakeholders.
Easy to share with our stakeholders. It's a good visualization. Why do I want this information? Thank you. Again, look, I have implemented enterprise risk management programs. I've managed risk for portfolios and programs and all kinds of things. We have, in an enterprise, we may have hundreds of risks. If I don't have a way to quantify and show the risk profile across the enterprise and know where to spend my dollars, I'm not being a very good steward for the company, am I? So this shows, and by the way, on the right-hand side, if you were a program manager, imagine that you've got 4 or 5 projects within your program. You could add up the the risk exposure in each of those projects and compare one project to another. This is not complicated. It's really fairly simple. So we've categorized, we've talked about assessment. Let's talk about prioritization of risk. And why do we prioritize? So we prioritize, we're going to take the output. We're going to take the output from our risk assessment. I've got like that probability impact matrix. And now I want to know what are the most critical risks to the least critical risk. And where this helps is, number one, let me just ask, anybody in here have all the resources that you ever need for every project? Anybody? I didn't think so. So what we're doing from a resource management perspective, those precious limited resources that we have, we want to make sure that we know where to allocate those resources. And in the risk management world, we often call these risk owners. So we've got this risk. We've said it's a big risk. I want Lowell to own this risk. And as the risk owner, he's now responsible for the development of the risk response plan. He's going to monitor the risk. If the risk actually occurs, he's going to take care. He's going to handle and manage that risk. So resource management. Another thing is to reduce cost. So we have opportunities and we have threats. If there's an opportunity there and we fail to identify it, and we fail to identify that opportunity, does that matter very much? It could matter a whole lot. If there's a significant threat there and I fail to identify that threat, it could be very costly. Let me go back to the fire in Nanny's house. Would it have been cheaper to have identified that risk up front and managed the risk, or wait until we have a fire and then go fix it? Well, I can tell you, it costs a bunch of money to fix my grandmother's kitchen. So this prioritization, a lot of it is about reducing cost of the project, but the other thing, don't miss this, there is a cost for risk management. Right? These meetings, when I've got 8, 10 people, high-powered, high-paid individuals sitting around this table to identify risk and assess risk, that costs the company money. And so, as stewards, we want to prioritize these risks in a way that we're managing the most significant opportunities and threats. Does this make sense? Okay? So, here's how we do it. Here's how we prioritize. Again, this is so simple. We take the output of the qualitative probability impact matrix, and you tell me, how would you go about determining what is most critical to least critical? Say it loudly. Look at the risk score. And what would I do with the risk score? Sort it in descending order. And now, bam. I can see that E, A, and D are our top risks. Now, 5 risks, not a big deal, but if you got 50, you have several hundred risks, this becomes very powerful in saving us a lot of time, money, and energy. The other thing, and we could do this with our quantitative risk exposure too, could we not? The other thing that we do is we define a risk threshold. Okay? This can be a little bit arbitrary. But typically, I meet with the project sponsor and the key people on the project, and we talk about this, and at some point we say, every risk that has a risk score of X or higher is on the urgent list. Okay? It is an urgent risk. That means that we're going to assign a risk owner, that there has to be a risk response plan, and that we're actually taking action where we can. Now, some risks, all we can do is develop a contingency plan, and if it hits a trigger, then we execute that plan. Others, there are things that we can do immediately to mitigate the risk or avoid the risk or whatever risk strategy you choose. Now, what about those risks below the threshold? So we say any risk that has a risk score, in this case below 20, we're going to say that falls on the watch list. And why are we watching those risks? Why don't we just forget about it? Thank you. They can change. The probability, risks, it's not a static world we live in. Risks are constantly changing, and the best project managers are regularly doing these processes. They're all over this stuff. So we watch, and indeed, one of these, risk D may become a risk score 20. And then at that point, we're going to take some action. So, we've got 10 minutes, Richard tells me. I will be glad to entertain a couple of questions about what we've talked about so far, and then I have just a couple of final comments and we'll wrap up. What questions might you have? And if somebody with the mic can come to the person, just raise your hand high about categorizing risk, assessing risk, prioritizing risk. I know we're about to have a break. Okay. Can we get a mic right here? Y'all are very patient. I appreciate it.
Do you recommend splitting your risk into positive versus negative?
Okay. Great question. One that I get often. Some people choose to have an opportunity register that is separate from their threats register. There's no right or wrong way about doing that, but I will say this much. If you're a project manager and you're not regularly facilitating the identification of opportunities and managing those, we're not doing our job. Does that help? Okay? Other questions? Richard's going to pick you. Okay, right there in the back.
When you talk about assessing risk, you talked about the probability and the impact. I've read some documents where they also put in the equation the easiness of discovering the risk. Would you put it in one of those two criteria, or would you add it?
Okay, so the question is that there might be an attribute around ease of addressing the risk, and we can certainly do that. In the risk management plan, you would need to define that attribute and the scale for it and what that means. Another common attribute that I've seen and I've actually used is velocity. So if I've got two risks and they both have a score of 20, but one is going to happen faster than the other, you do this, don't you? I mean, you just, off the top of your head, you go, wow, yeah, those are two risks. They have an equal risk score, but that guy right there, if I don't address that risk, within 2 weeks, there's going to be a major impact to this project. And so oftentimes I've used the risk velocity as another attribute in evaluating those risks. Hope that was helpful. Anything else? So a couple of last minute comments and we'll be done. So we've been talking a lot about doing work that matters most. Michael Hyatt, in his excellent book, Living Forward, suggests that we define life accounts. These are categories. For me, it's things like faith, it's like family, it's friends, it's my finances, it's my work, it's my health. And every year, early part of the year, I actually sit down and write out a few goals for each of those areas of my life. I want to encourage that you be very intentional about the things that matter most outside of work. I'm a little bit further down the road than many of you in my career, and I can say this, and I'm not perfect about this at all, but I can say this. Many days I'm at work and I'm working really hard, and the reason that I'm able to focus and do the hard work that I'm doing is because I'm not worried about things at home. My relationship with my wife in the top left-hand corner, her name's Sherry, and there's our little dog Hobson. My son Austin there fishing, my daughter in the lower left-hand corner, and my precious granddaughter Catherine. Have I mentioned Catherine yet? These principles that we've been talking about of categorizing, assessing, and prioritizing, I know it sounds a little strange, but we can actually apply these in our personal lives. I hope you'll give that some thought. So I promised you, I hope every one of you is jotting this down because I worked hard to put this together for you. I have summarized everything that I've covered in this presentation. I've also given you links to several other articles on my website that go into much more detail about how to do these things. And you can find that at projectriskcoach.com/PMI Palmetto. And by the way, if you scan all the way down through the page on the website, at the bottom there's a button where you can just do a download and you get the PDF version of that. So I hope you'll check that out. I want to leave you with a final thought from author, blogger, speaker Michael Hyatt. He said, "Don't fear failure. Fear being in the exact same place next year as you are today." I'm Harry Hall. Thank you so much for your time.